Go ahead and repeat a little bit, Kevin, for those that didn't.
Okay. Our first award winner was the Women Land and Legacy Group from Iowa County. They've done a lot of things in Iowa County over the last several years, which makes them award worthy for us, and I'm just proud as can be that they were here to join us today. We've got Katie Timmerman here and Leslie Maxwell to receive the award. And some of the things that that group's done, and what they do, it's kind of neat because they recognize not only the current group, but past members of the group and some of the cool things they've done. And some of the things that strike me in this group is that they put together a Women Land and Legacy cookbook, which they actually sell for revenues to help fund their activities in the county, which is kind of a unique thing, and I think that's very, very cool. They also do an awful lot of outreach activities, and they try to get together like 4 or 5 times a year to do stuff. One of the things they do is they have a local products project they work on or event that actually highlights rural business people and women, especially women operators in the county each year. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So kudos to you guys. The thing that strikes me the most is kind of the last couple of lines on here is their passion for education, empowerment, and outreach to women as an underserved group. Exemplifies what can be achieved in a short period of time with hard work, collaboration, and open mind. Women in Iowa County and across the state are more informed, empowered, and aware as a result of this group's effort. So congratulations, guys. Our next award winner is for the individual award, and so everybody knows we had several folks that were in this category for the individual award, and so it was kind of an interesting discussion, I and my fellow committee members, as we looked through the award applications. And the person we identified this year is Mike Mahoney. Come on up, Mike. He's a soil conservation technician in the Spirit Lake field office for the NRCS office. And one of the things that stood out to us with Mike's application actually was submitted by Jim Shawley, watershed project coordinator there, and Derek Namney. There we go. Urban conservationist there. But what stood out to us a lot is we've got some folks that we had applications for to do a lot of different kind of outreach activities. It's actually part of their jobs. And so they're doing some neat things with that. So I don't want to minimize that at all. But what Mike's application brought to us is kind of an awareness and a vision of what all of us can do individually within our own offices. And we wanted to highlight that as much as anything because this is something all of us can be doing. And for that reason, Mike, that's the reason you got recognized. Some of the things he does in the write-up, he talks about EO and civil rights topics and covers during almost weekly staff meetings, which is very, very impressive. Brings the information to the Soil and Water Conservation District Commissioners on a monthly basis. I appreciate that. And also, as we have special emphasis months, Mike makes sure that stuff's discussed regularly amongst the staff. So for that purpose, he's getting an award. And the bottom line on this is even though he's busy keeping up with customer demand, he still takes the time out of his schedule to ensure he has an office for doing everything we can for EEO and civil rights. So congratulations, Mike. Thanks to all the award winners. And with that, John, I think I'm going to turn it right back over to you so we can start the presentation.
Okay, I failed to mention the other USDA Service Center agencies when we started off, but I would like to recognize Rural Development's involvement as well as Farm Service Agency's involvement, and both of their directors, Bill Menner and John Whitaker, for the work that they do, encouraging civil rights and diversity information getting out to all of us as employees and to help us to do our jobs more effectively and working with the public more effectively. Today we have a very key topic with regard to 2 things. One, our special emphasis this month being Black Americans, and the African American Museum of Iowa, which is actually located in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and we have a speaker today by the name of Crystal Galden, if I'm pronouncing your name right, I hope. And she received her BA in History from Spelman College in Atlanta in 2010, and is in the process of completing her master's thesis from Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. She has a long list of accomplishments, which include interning with the Indiana Historical Society from 2010 to 2012, where she worked on traveling exhibits and assisted with the installation of 2 holiday exhibits, as well as conducted many programs. Notably, she was the lead graduate researcher of 2 living history exhibits with the Indiana Historical Society. One was You Are There, 1955, Ending Polio, and You Are There, 1939, Healing Bodies, Changing Minds, which she also assisted in installing and in the interpretation processes. She began working at the African American Museum of...
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. As mentioned, my name is Crystal Glenn. I'm the museum educator at the African American Museum of Iowa, and we are going to be sharing kind of Iowa's African American history timeline. Again, since we only have about 45 minutes, I won't be able to share everything, but I'm going to highlight the key here at the museum and in Iowa's African American history, also highlighting some of the agricultural sectors and some of the agricultural feats of some of those key figures and how that's affected and impacted Iowa's African American history. If we can move to the next slide. This gives you a quick rundown for those of you that have not been to the museum before of the different things that we do. So, of course, being a museum, our 3 main focuses are preservation, exhibition, and education, which is heavily my part on the education. Going out and sharing this history throughout the state as well as at the museum. Because we are a statewide museum, we do not just focus on Cedar Rapids, so a lot of these stories will be talking about areas all across the state of Iowa. For those of you that haven't been to see us and have not been to our building, the picture that you see there is our building that's located in downtown Cedar Rapids in the Depot City Market area, right next to the Cedar River. If any of you do come to visit, you will see, for those of you that were affected by the 2008 flood, we did take on water being that close to the river, about 5 feet of standing water. Thankfully, after that, we were able to come back strong with a lot of community support and help in 2009, updating our exhibits and adding even more information. Next slide, please. So one of the very first stories in relationship to African Americans and Iowa that we like to discuss is a gentleman named York. Now, most people have never heard of York before, no relation to the state of New York. If you take a look at this picture, the gentleman that you see there and this group of Native Americans is York. York was a slave who belonged to William Clark. Now, whenever people think of William Clark, of course they know him from the Lewis and Clark expedition. The United States has now purchased this large piece of land from France, which the land that is now the state of Iowa being part of that as well. Most people know the story of Lewis and Clark and that expedition, and they know about Sacagawea and her contributions to that expedition. Very few people ever hear about York. York essentially grew up with William Clark, and whenever William Clark came of age, he was now considered an adult male, he was given York to be his manservant. As York was with them on this expedition, he was extremely helpful in hunting and fishing, and sometimes helping communicate with a lot of Native American people. And if you look at the way that the Native American group was looking at him in this picture, they would often do things like try to touch his arms or touch his face. Because for most Native Americans in this area, in this piece of land, they had never come in contact with a person of African descent before. So they weren't sure if this color that was on his skin was something that he put on every day, or if it was something that naturally occurred. So they would try to wipe his skin to see if any of that came off. And because you can tell in this picture he's a little bit bigger than they are, they'd also never seen somebody with skin that dark and with such broad stature. Well, whenever this group gets all the way over to the West Coast, they have to decide what they're going to do. Winter is essentially right around the corner, and they know that they're not going to be able to make it back over the mountains before that heavy snowfall hits. So everybody gets an equal vote on where they are going to stay in that time frame. So York is very important to us and very important for Iowa's African American history for 2 particular reasons. The first reason being, him voting on where they were going to spend the winter is the first time you see anybody of African descent getting to vote in any official capacity on U.S. territory. The second reason being that because, as I mentioned, the state of Iowa, the land that is not the state of Iowa, was part of that Louisiana Purchase. This means that York is the first known person of African descent to set foot within the state of Iowa. Now, despite all the ways that he contributed to this exhibition, whenever everybody gets back, they get money, they get land, they get all sorts of accolades and awards. But York has to go right back into that system of slavery. He is still property of William Clark. So he spends the next 15 years repeatedly asking and requesting for his freedom. At one point, William Clark even secured to work for a more harsher slave master just to get him to stop asking for his freedom. But after 15 years, he does finally get to live out his life as a free person. Next slide, please. So now we've gotten to the early 1800s, and I just wanted to lay a little groundwork and talk about some of the restrictions that were put on African Americans. Some of them did start to move to Iowa because they felt they would have a little more allowance, a little more freedom. And over the course of this presentation, you'll see quite a few areas where Iowa has been a bit more progressive than other states in the country. But that doesn't necessarily mean that at this point, African Americans are being welcomed with open arms. Even in states like Iowa, there are still quite a few restrictions that are being put on them. Of course, they couldn't attend any public schools because African Americans were perceived as not being trustworthy and not being reliable. They were neither allowed to testify in court or to serve on a jury. Of course, they were not given the right to vote, and it was thought that they would not be reliable enough or intelligent enough or stable enough to serve in the military. They weren't allowed to have any romantic interactions, marrying or dating a white person. And just for entering the state of Iowa, they would be made to pay a fee of around $500. Now, this works very similarly to a security deposit. Essentially, just in case they did anything wrong while they were here, the state wanted them to have some sort of money just in case there was anything they had to pay for. They wanted them to have some sort of investment to try to keep them in line. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Working on it, Crystal, but it's not working right now.
Wonderful. Now, in this section, I'm going to talk a little bit about a gentleman named Ralph. Now, this is one of the early and rather well-known court cases having to do with the system of slavery. Of course, slavery is not legal in the state of Iowa, but directly south of us, you can have states such as Missouri that do allow slavery. Now, this gentleman, Ralph, who was a slave in Missouri, was given permission by his slave owner to come up to the city of Dubuque to work in the coal mines there. He was given 5 years working in the coal mines to try to save up enough money to buy back his freedom. Now, right before that 5 years is up, Ralph's slave master sent slave catchers to take Ralph from Dubuque and bring him back to the state of Missouri. Well, being in Iowa, Ralph is able to contest this. And this court actually goes all the way up to the Iowa Territorial Supreme Court. And they rule by the state of the law that Ralph, a man of color, is technically free. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular case is that in the state of Iowa, under these circumstances, Ralph is given his freedom. This case is actually very similar to the Dred Scott case, which is happening in the 1860s. A lot of the circumstances are very similar, including being stuck in that system of slavery in the state of Missouri. Now, if you were to look at those two cases, the outcomes are exact opposites. One of the big things that's happening in between those two cases is the rise of the Fugitive Slave Act. Now, this act made it that the northern states were no longer a final safe destination, especially for those traveling on the Underground Railroad who were trying to escape that system of slavery. Now at this point, Canada is going to become that final destination because this Fugitive Slave Act states essentially that if you are property in any of the southern states, no matter where you go within the United States, you are still considered property. And by law, you must be returned to your slave master. Ralph's case was even used as an example during the Dred Scott case. But again, having that crucial law, that Fugitive Slave Act happening between these two cases, caused those outcomes to be completely opposite. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk a little bit more about that escape on the Underground Railroad. As most people know, usually those paths coming out of the southern states go directly from the south to the north, heading towards Canada. But if you look at the trail of Iowa's Underground Railroad paths, they don't run directly north, but instead they run west-east. And this is primarily for slaves that are escaping, again, out of the state of Missouri. Now, this is in the early and mid-1800s, and of course, just like today, you have quite a few people who are either working in the agricultural sector or who are working in industries relating to the river. And this is where most people are settling. As I'm sure we all know, the further north that you go, the longer and harsher the winters get. And if you're somebody who is growing crops, you do want a bit of a warmer amount of time. You do want a longer stretch of time to grow more crops, sell them to make a little more money for yourself or for your family. So most people are going to be settling in the southern half of the state. And even if you are a slave who's escaping and trying to do it as quietly as possible, you still want to travel in an area where there are people and there are resources. If you look towards the bottom of that map, you'll see that there's an area called the Village of Salem that's marked with a big circle. It sort of looks like a tire with spokes coming out of it. This area was actually a Quaker settlement. And Quakers are known for being very strong abolitionists. Even when some slave owners would find that they had a slave missing in Missouri, sometimes they would automatically send slave catchers to the city of Salem, just assuming that that escaping slave would go there for some sort of help or some sort of assistance. Now, one specific person that I'm going to highlight in this section, if you look at the top right corner of the screen, is a lady named Miss Charlotta Piles, or she was nicknamed in Iowa, Grandma Piles. She was actually a slave from the state of Kentucky. And she and her children were working for an older gentleman, an older slave master. As he was getting ready and he knew that he was on his deathbed, he verbally left Charlotta and her children to his daughter, who was also an abolitionist. He knew that his daughter would set her and her family free. But of course, living in a state like Kentucky, even if you are free, and even if you are in some of the northern states, having your free papers doesn't always keep you safe. There have been many free African Americans who were kidnapped and sent to the South to work as slaves. Now, the lady who was now Charlotta's new slave master had two brothers who got into a little bit of gambling debt. To pay off this debt, they kidnapped Charlotta's son and two of her son-in-laws to pay off what they owed. Because of this, Charlotta's new slave owner knew that she would not be safe if she stayed in Kentucky. So they left and decided to take a steamboat heading north. Originally, they were planning on going as far north as Minnesota. But as winter was hitting, they decided to stop around the city of Keokuk and decided to stay and settle there. Now, because it was just Charlotta and her daughters, working in domestic service was not going to allow them to make enough money to feed themselves. So Charlotta decided to go on a speaking tour out on the East Coast, mostly in the Philadelphia area, to try to raise enough money to buy back her two sons-in-law. This would take around $1,500. Now, her son does write her to see if she can make enough money to buy him back as well. And Charlotta is forced to make the hard decision to tell him to find his own way, mostly because he doesn't have a family. He doesn't have anybody that he has to take care of or that he has to be responsible for, unlike her two daughters' husbands. So she makes enough money and buys him back and brings him to Keokuk to help work to make enough money for the family. Since she and her family decide to stay in that area, Miss Charlotta Piles then starts helping people as they're escaping Underground Railroad, and she becomes a shepherd in that area of Keokuk, which is how she gets the nickname Grandma Piles. Now, in the top left corner, you will see an advertisement for a reward for an escaped slave named Henry. This was very common to find in newspapers whenever a slave owner from the South found that they had a slave who had escaped. And these would run in the Southern and in Northern newspapers. Now, if you think about this puts a lot of risk on both sides of the escaping slaves and of people who wanted to assist them on the Underground Railroad. Of course, for an escaping slave, there was that physical danger of being caught, taken back, and being punished brutally or killed for escaping in the first place. For people who wanted to assist escaping slaves, they could either be fined more money than their family made in an entire year and or put in jail. This is why you would often find escaping slaves hiding places like barn lofts or outhouses. This way they have a place where they can remain hidden and out of sight without having to alert the family and put them in danger by letting them know that they're there. And because traveling through Iowa, you have these very tall prairie grasses that most people would say it's easy to lose a cow. And clearly, if you can hide a cow, you can hide a person. So that's one thing that escaping slaves would do, is find a way and learn how to hide in the tall prairie grasses while they were making their way to freedom, usually going towards the river and then heading north from there. Next slide, please. So now we've gotten to the Civil War. This conversation about slavery has become a huge national debate, and is one of the major reasons for sparking this war. But you still have people who are debating whether African American men are capable, strong enough, and smart enough to make good soldiers. During this time in Iowa, you start to see prominent African Americans, including a man named Alexander Clark, who I'll talk about in just a few minutes, who start writing and petitioning politicians and business leaders, trying to get their support to bring African Americans in to fight during this war. Now, this is when they get together the 60th United States Colored Troops Regiment, mostly containing African American soldiers from Iowa, a few from Missouri as well. This regiment ends up being stationed in Helena, Arkansas, which is a hot, marshy swampland, and they're down there defending a fort. Now, of the 911 men that are stationed in the 60th, only 11 of them ever die in battle. Those are outstanding numbers for a group of men that they did not think was going to be able to fight. Now, you did have 332 other soldiers who ended up dying of injuries not related to the war, mostly from disease. If you think about where they're stationed, they're usually downriver from a lot of the white regiments. And with sanitation being what it was in the mid and late 1800s, whenever these white regiments are using the bathroom or getting ill near the river, they're cleaning themselves, bathing, and all of this bacteria is floating downriver, and this is the water that these soldiers have to drink, to bathe in, to cook with. And a lot of times when they are getting sick, they're not getting the proper medications, if any medication at all, or they're getting medication that's already expired or tainted. This is why you have over a third of these men who end up being lost, not relating to their battle or to their skill in battle, but relating mostly to disease and not having the proper supplies. Despite all of this, whenever these men get back to the state of Iowa, they start the petition for the right to vote. It takes 5 years, and of course the state of Iowa says no at first, but after 5 years of continuous petitioning and people like Mr. Alexander Clark, who are also petitioning on their behalf, the state of Iowa does finally give African Americans the right to vote. Now, of course, it's one thing to have that law that's on your side, but it does take much longer to get everybody to support and fall behind those laws and policies. So they would still use things like poll taxes and literacy tests to try to keep African American men from the polls. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, Mr. Alexander Clark has a number of things that he's done while he was in the state of Iowa. He wasn't originally born here, but moved to the city of Muscatine whenever he was a young man in his 20s. If you look at this list to the right, this is a quick rundown, but not a complete list, of some of the things that he is most known for. The thing that he is best known for is actually helping integrate Iowa a lot of businessmen, a lot of politicians, a lot of movers and shakers in that area. Because, of course, this is before your invention of safety razors, so any man who wanted to be clean-shaven, who tried to do it himself, was kind of taking his life into his own hands. So for all of these men who were very prominent in the community, they were interacting with Mr. Alexander Clark because they would have to go to the barbershop for a clean shave. This is how Mr. Alexander Clark, one of the ways in which he became so effective. And he had a variety of things that he was involved in. On top of owning and operating the barbershop, Mr. Alexander Clark owned 2 large plots of land. And on one of those plots of land, he was growing crops in the area and using those crops and selling them to local markets at an affordable rate, helping supply jobs for people who were helping work that physical land in the state of Iowa, but also helping to provide affordable resources to local markets near the area of Muscatine. The second thing he did with another large plot of land close to the river was that he was using all of that timber and all of the wooded area that was there and selling off that timber to people and merchants who were working up and down the Mississippi River. And this took a chunk of land on that northeast side of the area of Muscatine. And he owned and operated this land and operated this business during most of the time that he was in the area. On top of that, he owned and operated a newspaper in Muscatine and later on one in Chicago. But as I mentioned, the biggest thing that he's known for actually has to do with his 12-year-old daughter, Susan Clark. Susan Clark has to go to the outskirts of the city of Muscatine to go to the school that's just for African-American students. His family lives practically across the street from school number 2, which is an all-white school. And when Alexander Clark looks and he compares those 2 schools, he says that school number 2 has globes and charts and competent teachers. That school has the better resources, and this is the school that he wants little Susan Clark to be able to go to. As he tries to enroll Susan at school number 2, they turn her away. So Mr. Alexander Clark decides that he is going to sue the Muscatine School District. But this case just does not stay in Muscatine. This case actually goes all the way up to the Iowa Supreme Court. And in 1867, they ruled that Iowa state schools should legally be integrated. Now again, this is another very progressive move by the state of Iowa. But just like with the men who were lobbying for their right to vote, it's one thing to have that law on the books. It's another thing to have people who actually follow and back up those laws and those policies. So some schools did integrate, but they would pass laws saying that if any of the parents in that school district or in that school had any issue with it, they would keep the school separate. Or if any of the teachers had any issues teaching in integrated classrooms, they would keep the school separate. But we have been hard-pressed to find any other state that has passed a state school integration law before the state of Iowa. And this is happening almost 90 years before Brown versus the Board of Education, almost 90 years before the federal government integrates schools in the United States. Because Mr. Alexander Clark could not stop there, later on his son, Alexander Clark Jr., becomes the first African-American to graduate from the University of Iowa's law school. Alexander Clark thinks this is so amazing that at almost the age of 60, follows his son to the same law school and becomes the second African-American to graduate from the University of Iowa's law program. And whenever he passes at the end of his life, he is actually been appointed as the U.S. ambassador to the country of Liberia. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the beginning of the 1900s and the migration of African Americans and a lot of farm families to the state of Iowa. What you see here are 3 pictures of groups of people and working in different industries. Of course, you have some different industries such as coal mining and other businesses that are starting to pop up around the state. At the top left corner, you see another picture of African Americans who are working in industries like pharmacies and shoe shine industries. And at the top right, you see a farm family that has moved to the Lee County, Iowa area. So you're starting to see a lot of families who are hoping that the relative race relations in Iowa are going to be much better than those in the South. So they're moving from places like Virginia and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and moving to different cities and moving different plots of land in the state of Iowa. Again, quite a few of them being in the south and closer to the river. But these families are starting to take that skill and that knowledge that they have, especially from a lot of those sharecropping areas in the south, and are bringing that skill to the state of Iowa. And a lot of these families are keeping that plot of land and keeping it in the family, passing it down to different generations, but are also starting to move into bigger company-owned areas, and are starting to try to move up in the ranks and move up pay scale-wise into some of those larger agricultural businesses and a lot of those natural resource businesses that are starting to move into the state. Next slide, please. Now, the picture that you see here on this slide is a more modern Google Maps snapshot. And the area where you see that A on the screen is actually where the city of Buxton, Iowa used to be located. For those of you that have never heard of Buxton or do not exactly know where Buxton is now, it's not really a place that you can take a trip to today because there are no roads that lead to Buxton. No signs, no old roads that lead to the area, and even if you find where Buxton was located, if you go there today, you are not going to see any buildings or any remnants of the city. Next slide, please. Now, the pictures that you see here on the screen are some of the activities that were going on in Buxton. Buxton was a town that was started by the Consolidation Coal Company in Monroe County at the turn of the century, the beginning of the 1900s. Now, the interesting thing about Buxton is Buxton was actually nicknamed the Black Utopia because of some of the freedoms that were allotted to African Americans who moved to work for the company. Now, everything in Buxton belonged to the coal company. The buildings, the schools, the stores, everything. It was your very common company town. One of the biggest reasons that Buxton was nicknamed the Black Utopia was because of the fact that all the coal miners, black and white, got paid the same. So if you look at the picture in the bottom left corner of those coal miners, thanks to the company and the union that was working within the company, those two gentlemen would have been paid an equal wage. Something very uncommon for the beginning of the 1900s, because most times African Americans working in different industries would usually get paid less than their white counterparts. And the families who are moving to Buxton are getting opportunities that they wouldn't have had in quite a few other cities and states in the country. African Americans there are owning businesses, they're working as successful politicians. The town of Buxton had two doctors, a black doctor and a white doctor, and the black doctor actually got more patients, both black and white, than the white doctor did. At one point, Buxton actually had an African American majority. 55% of the town was African American. Although it didn't stay an African American majority during the time that Buxton was around, African Americans were always the largest ethnic group within the city. If you look at the picture in the bottom center, you'll see that there was an African American woman with an integrated class. This woman was actually the principal of an integrated school, which is something else that's very uncommon, because no matter what city that you're in, having an African American woman who's working as a principal of a school usually did not happen. Now, unfortunately, Buxton only lasted for less than 30 years because you started to see some accidents that were happening within the coal mines, and the resources themselves were starting to become depleted. And the company itself realized that they could get better quality coal in other places, such as Illinois. So, around 1927, after you start to see a great decline and demise of the city, Consolidation Coal Company packs up everything, including the buildings, and moves to Springfield, Illinois. Some families also moved to Springfield to continue working for the company, but others of these families decide to move to other cities in Iowa, such as Waterloo, or Cedar Rapids, or Des Moines. And they start to realize that the race relations that they had in Buxton did not transfer to those other cities. And a lot of the oral histories done by the children of these families, of these coal miners, say that they experienced harsher racism in these cities after Buxton essentially became dissolved. And like I mentioned, if you try to go to Buxton today, there is virtually nothing there except for privately owned farmland and one historic marker nearby the city to commemorate what's there. Next slide, please. So now we get to to the 19-teens and the rise of World War I. You now have some agreement that African Americans can work as soldiers and can be useful during war, but now you're starting to see a request from African American soldiers who would like to work as officers, who would like to work in command posts among these regiments. And so as they start to open up a school or figure out where they want to open up a school to train these African American officers, they look at the state of Iowa, because comparatively, especially compared to a lot of the southern states, Iowa's race relations are a little more temperate, a little bit milder than other places in the country. This is when they open up Fort Des Moines, the first African-American officers training camp. Now, this is still the 19-teens, and you still have a lot of tension between the races, and you do still have some very harsh treatment of these men, especially when they are off-site, when they are working in the civilian world or around the civilian population. And even within a lot of the white officers who are training these soon-to-be African-American officers, you see a great divide within social interaction, with a lot of these white officers only interacting with these soldiers during the hours that they are in training. They're still living, dining, having social time in separate facilities. At one point, there was one soldier who was accused of interacting with a white woman while he was out about the town, and he was given a very harsh treatment of being hanged in front of all of his classmates while he was still at the officers' training camp. You do have officers, both black and white, who agreed that this was a very harsh punishment, but there was still the factor of these officers seeing African Americans and seeing these African American officers as still being underneath their ranks, as still being less than them. But this is one great and one better opportunity for African American soldiers who would like to move up and train and work as officers during the war. Next slide, please. So for any of you who are either ISU fans or who have ever watched a game at the ISU Stadium, you know that this stadium is named after a gentleman named Jack Trice. Now, Jack Trice, pictured here on this slide, is playing in the 1920s and is the only and first African-American football player at the college. He hasn't been allowed to play in every game of the season, but this particular upcoming game against the University of Minnesota is the first game that he's going to get a chance to play in. So the night before, he writes a letter home to his family that says, "My thoughts just before the first real college game of my life, the honor of my race, family, and self are at stake." He knows that this game is going to be a huge deal, and he also knows that he could potentially be targeted for being the only African American on the field. And this is exactly what happened. Jack Trice was hit extremely hard during the course of this game. They try to take him out and put him on the bench, but he wants to be in. He wants to go right back in and work on the field. At the end of the game, they assess his injuries, and they don't see anything that looks too bad from the outside. And they even allow him to ride the bus home with the rest of his teammates. A few days later, Jack Trice is checked into the hospital because he has a massive amount of internal bleeding from how brutally and harshly he was hit while playing on that field. A few days after that, Jack Trice ends up dying due to his injuries. Now, over the course of the next 50 years, about 50 years later, you have students who petition to have something on the campus to honor the memory of Jack Trice. This is when they erect the first statue. But in 1997, you have more students who begin to petition for something else to honor the memory of Mr. Jack Trice. And this is when they decide to change the name of the stadium at ISU to the Jack Trice Stadium and move the statue closer to the stadium. Next slide, please. So now we've gotten to World War II and the training of the Tuskegee Airmen. At this point, you do have African Americans who are serving in the military and even some who are serving as officers, mostly as officers of African American rank. But now that fighting in the air, that air warfare has become a part of the war, you have African Americans who now wanted to be trained in the Army Air Corps pilot training program, but are all being denied due to their race. In Tuskegee, Alabama, at the Tuskegee Institute, they decided to open up a training program that's supposed to train African American pilots through civilian pilots, not officially as part of the war. But course, when you have people like Miss Eleanor Roosevelt who start backing their cause alongside civil rights activists, then presidents like FDR can't say no forever. With their support and their petitioning, as well as the support of Miss Eleanor Roosevelt, he finally decides to open up the Army Air Corps training program to African Americans. And these men are all trained at Tuskegee and are known as the Tuskegee Airmen. During the course of the war, they obtained one of the best flight records and one of the best flight protection records during that war, protecting those big bombers whose only focus should be to focus on their target. They have these Tuskegee Airmen, also nicknamed the Red Tails, because of the P-52 Mustangs that they painted the end tips of them red. They lose very few of those bombers. Most people say that they never lost a plane, which is not necessarily true, but they did use very, very, very few. Most records, military and civilian and historical records, say between 12 and 15 planes total. On top of having a great protection record for those bombers, they also helped take out some key communications of those German soldiers. Now, these men were fighting on two fronts. It was a concept called the double V concept, victory abroad and victory at home, because not only did these Tuskegee Airmen obtain a great flight record and were crucial to keeping those bombers efficient during the war, but they also spent part of their time, some of them not knowing it, but were also representing integrating the armed forces. Next slide, please. So now we have another football story, but this one is happening in the 1950s at Drake University. If you look at this picture, in the very center, there's a gentleman from Drake in white who is holding and carrying the football. That is where all the action should be happening and should be focused. At the top right corner of that picture, you see African-American football player Johnny Bright in white. And an Oklahoma A&M player is launching himself into the face of Mr. Johnny Bright, dislocating his jaw. Now this picture is not just posted at the two school papers, but becomes a big national controversy. This is shown all over the country. The gentleman who actually took this picture ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize. Because of how badly Johnny Bright was hit, and because of that dislocation to his jaw, they decided to change the football helmets. I know it's a bit hard to see, but the football helmets that they're wearing during this game are the ones that have the leather chin strap and one single bar in the front. Because of what happened to an African-American football player at Drake University, they changed the football helmets from having the one plastic bar in the front to now having the full face mask. So most football players today that are sustaining relatively fewer injuries should be thanking Mr. Johnny Bright. Next slide, please. Now, as we talk about civil rights in the state of Iowa, a lot of people seem to forget that there was that inconsistency, there was that segregation, that racism that was happening in the North and as well as in the South, although it wasn't as brutal of a system as it was in a lot of the southern states. Now, this picture that you see here is a recreation of the Catch Drugstore lunch counter in the city of Des Moines. And on a warm summer day, Miss Edna Griffin and her daughter are out running errands in Des Moines. They decide to stop into Catch Drugstore because Edna wants to pick up a few items, but she also wants to order something to eat for herself and for her daughter. She walks up to the lunch counter, and she tries to order food. But the lunch counter owner says that he doesn't serve African Americans at Catch Drugstore. So Miss Edna Griffin puts back her other things because if her money's not good enough for food, then she's not going to buy anything else there, and she decides to leave. But she comes back, and over the course of 1948 and 1949, she starts protesting Catch Drugstore. She and others who help her organize start picketing out front in front of the drugstore. They also start organizing a multitude of sit-ins. Now, as many of you probably know, one of the reasons that sit-ins are so effective, on top of being nonviolent, is that they get to that root of that owner. Because essentially, no matter how you feel about the people who come in, every business owner goes into business to make money. If you are somebody that he or she refuses to serve, and you're taking up all of the spaces in that restaurant, they do not have a way to make any money. getting to the root and to the core of their end goal. You mess with their bottom line. Now, this doesn't just take one time, because as I mentioned, she does this multiple times over the course of that 2-year span. On top of that, she and another gentleman file a lawsuit against the owner of the drugstore. But in 1949, he finally does decide to start serving African Americans at his lunch counter. And some of you may know, but if you go downtown today to the same building, it has now been renamed after Miss Edna Griffin. But you can no longer go to the cash drugstore lunch counter, but you can happily go to Quiznos to order a sandwich instead. Next slide, please. Now, in our museum, this is the final place where we end our tours. And the interesting thing about this picture and this podium is that they are actually in direct line of sight of that lunch counter that we just spoke about. In the course of 60 years, Miss Edna Griffin went from not being able to order food at the cash drugstore to, in 2008, a large group of people in the state of Iowa stating that an African American man is capable and should be able to lead this country, to hold the most powerful office in this country. The podium that you see in this picture is actually the podium that President Obama was using whenever he was caucusing in Iowa during his first election. It is actually the only actual artifact you see in our museum that is not in some sort of protected case. On the other side of that podium, facing that picture that's on the wall, there is a name and a date, the signature of President Obama from 2008, that is covered and encased in acrylic. That podium itself was made by a Cedar Rapids company and does not officially belong to us, but they are allowing us to display it in the museum. So as long as they don't need it, or as long as the president does not say that he needs it for anything. This is one of the reasons that we've titled our exhibit Endless Possibilities, is that timeline that I've just shared pieces of with you, finishing and culminating in this picture, shows that shift and that change in Iowa's African American history. And we wanted to make sure that we highlighted not just the negatives, not just some of the harsh treatment or all of the things that African Americans had to work through and work past, but the possibilities that have come out of all that work that's been laid by the people that came before us, and how that's affected not only Iowa's history and Iowa's African American history, and how that's affected national history, because there are quite a few names and quite a few people that have gone on to affect things outside of just the state of Iowa. If there are any questions at this point, I will be happy to attempt to take them over the phone and answer to my best ability.
Very good presentation, Crystal. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right now we've got all the phones silenced around the state, and with the issues we had earlier, I'm not sure I'm going to open them back up. But what I would like to have you do is for everybody to recognize is that why don't you, for the group, put in a little bit of plug for your museum, and with that, maybe some contact information. If they want to contact you directly to ask questions, I think that'd be wonderful.
Yes. And my contact information, if you call the museum, our number is 319-862-2101, and my extension is 226. Or if you call and you get the front desk, you can just ask to speak to me, Crystal Gladden. Or if you would like, feel free to email me at kgladden@blackiowa.org. That's KGLADD as in dog, EN@blackiowa.org.
Awesome. And do you want to go ahead and put in a plug for the museum too?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you want to go ahead and put in a plug for your museum as well?
I'm sorry, it broke up one more time.
Would you like to go ahead and try to put in a plug for your museum so people know where you're at and can come see you?
The museum is located at 55 12th Avenue Southeast in Cedar Rapids. If you know where New Grove City Market is, or if you go downtown, we are located right next to the river. We are directly across from the Czech and Slovak Museum. We're open Monday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Adults for admission is $5, $4 for seniors, and if you are a student, whether that is collegiate, grad school, technical school, anything like that, it's only $2.50 for admission. If any of you would like to organize a tour, we do guided tours for groups of at least 10. at your site.
Thank you very much, Crystal. On behalf of NRCS, FSA, and RD, I really think it was a very informative program, and I do appreciate your presentation today. Very good. As we're wrapping up here today, again, if you've got questions for Crystal, don't be afraid to contact her. I think that the same goes for the other chairs with both myself, Patty Murray for FSA, and right now Ann Knight standing in for rural development. We'd be willing to take questions and get them to Crystal if that's more convenient for you too as well. I was also asked to make one more plug. As you know, we do the Crosswords of Diversity newsletter, and rural development's kind of taking the lead in that. And Ann is looking for an opportunity, if anybody's got articles, to always make sure that you get them to her. And Ann, for my part, we've got some pictures today of the award winners. I want to make sure we'll get those to you as well, so they can be part of that publication. Lastly, I want to kind of revisit back to the award winners. Mike and a group from Iowa County for Women Land Legacy. Again, good job, and we appreciate all your work. And with that, I want to thank everybody. I know everybody's busy out there with all kinds of programs and stuff. I appreciate you taking some time today and joining us. And remind folks that weren't able to join us, this is recorded, and we'll get the information out how to get to that. So with that, a good day.